The complaining king. The bells of the palace chimed each morning at dawn, and each morning King Halvran complained before the final note had faded. He complained about the bells. They are too shrill, he would mutter from beneath velvet blankets. A kingdom should wake with dignity, not the cry of startled geese. By the time he reached the council chamber, his complaints had grown. The floors were too cold. The windows too narrow. The petitions too dull. The courtiers too slow. Even the sun, which streamed faithfully through the tall arches, was, according to the king, unnecessarily bright. It was widely known that King Halvran could find fault with a diamond, yet none suffered his complaints more than Lord Marsin. The king's chief adviser, Marsin was a careful man, thin, silver-haired, with patient eyes that had endured decades of royal grievances. If the king disliked the taxes, Marsin adjusted them. If he disliked the roads, Marsin ordered repairs. If he disliked the weather, Marsin quietly suggested patience, but patience, like bread, grows stale with too much handling. Marsin, the king said one morning, slamming a goblet onto the council table, the stew last night was bland. Marsin blinked. Your Majesty, I believe the kitchens, and the music in the hall, the king continued, was mournful. Must every violinist in this kingdom sound like a widow? The council sat stiffly. They had learned that silence was safer than agreement, and you, the king added, turning to Marsin, always advising restraint. Always caution. Always consideration. A king must act, not ponder like a scholar with cold tea. Marsin bowed his head slightly, as your Majesty wishes. But in the long corridors outside the council chamber, whispers had begun to circulate. The palace servants, who heard more than nobles imagined, spoke softly in kitchens and stairwells. The king's temper had worsened, his punishments had grown sharper. And Lord Marsin, who had once shielded many from the king's impatience, was now himself a frequent target of scorn. One evening, during a council session that stretched past sunset, the king erupted again. The treasury dwindles, Halvran snapped. The harvest reports are dull. Even the wine tastes timid. Marsin folded his hands. The harvest was smaller due to the early frost, your Majesty. If we reduce the tax on the southern farms, they may recover by next. Always excuses. The king barked. A long silence followed. Then, in a voice colder than the stone beneath them, Halvran said, perhaps my adviser has grown as stale as the bread he recommends we ration. No one spoke. Marsin only bowed once more. Perhaps, he said softly, your Majesty is correct. That night, the palace was strangely quiet. The following morning, Lord Marsin did not appear at council. The king noticed immediately. Late, he scoffed. Typical. When needed most, he hides behind parchment and caution. No one dared contradict him. Servants moved carefully through the hall that day, their faces composed but watchful. By evening, the king's mood had worsened. Dinner, he declared, waving irritably toward the steward. And let it be something worthy of a crown for once. The royal dining chamber was vast, lit by dozens of tall candles whose flames trembled against polished silver plates. The kitchen had prepared an elaborate dish, a spiced meat pie set within a golden crust, crowned with herbs and roasted fruits. The aroma filled the chamber. The king inhaled skeptically. Well, he said, settling into his chair, it smells promising. A rare victory for the kitchen. A servant cut the first portion and placed it upon the king's plate. Halvran tasted it. He chewed slowly, his eyebrows lifted. The chamber froze. Remarkable, he said, surprised. Rich. Bold. Finally, a cook with ambition. The servants exchanged fleeting glances. The king took another bite. And tender, he continued. Though there is something unusual in the flavor. No one spoke. He carved deeper into the pie, exposing its darker center beneath the crust. Perhaps Marsin should have advised the kitchen more often, Halvran added dryly. If he did anything well, it was tolerating my complaints about food. A quiet cough came from the steward. Sire. Lord Marsin will not be attending dinner. The king waved dismissively. Yes, his absence has been thoroughly noted. Perhaps he sulks. He continued eating. Still, the king said thoughtfully, "This dish, what is it called?" The steward hesitated. "A special preparation, your majesty." Halvorin chuckled. "Finally, something special in this palace." He lifted his goblet, to the cook who prepared it. No one joined the toast. The king frowned slightly. "What is wrong with everyone tonight? You stare as though the moon has fallen into the soup." A younger servant near the end of the table looked pale. The steward stepped forward slowly. "Sire, there is something you should know." Halvorin sighed heavily. "If this is another complaint about the wine, no, your majesty." The steward gestured gently toward the pie. "This dish was prepared at the request of the kitchen staff. And" the steward swallowed, "they wished to offer a lesson." The king's irritation returned. "A lesson? To me?" He laughed sharply. "This should be entertaining." The steward lowered his eyes. "The principal ingredient, your majesty, was Lord Marson." Silence crashed into the room like a falling curtain. The king stared, then he laughed again, too quickly. "Ridiculous." No one moved. The young servant at the far end began trembling. The steward spoke softly. "Lord Marson was found dead this morning." The kitchen staff believed that your majesty had long devoured his counsel without gratitude. The king's fork rested halfway to his mouth. They believed, the steward continued carefully, that if you would not listen to his wisdom, perhaps you might taste it. The king slowly looked down at the plate. The rich aroma seemed suddenly heavier. The herbs no longer smelled pleasant. The candles flickered. For the first time in many years, King Halvorin had nothing to say. He set the fork down. Across the silent hall, every servant waited. At last the king pushed the plate away. The bells of the palace rang in the distance, shrill, sharp, exactly as they had every morning. But this time, the king did not complain, and from that night forward, the cooks of the palace prepared meals with meticulous care, for the king, it was said, had finally learned that a ruler who devours his advisors too carelessly may one day discover what it truly means to eat alone.